Hi, my name is Nicole London, and today we are here to talk about Leonard and his latest reevaluation data results. So, Leonard is a 7-year-old student who is served for special education under the category of autism. He currently attends Westside Elementary. He lives with his mom, his stepdad, and 3 older siblings. So, Leonard was administered the Reynolds Intellectual Assessment Scale. Um, the Reynolds Intellectual Assessment Scale estimates a verbal and a nonverbal index and basically comes up with what you would consider an intelligence score. So, for this test, a standard score of 100 is considered average. And then, so for Leonard, his verbal intelligence score was a 92, which means that he scored higher than 30% of his same age peers who took this assessment. His nonverbal intelligence score was 112, and that indicates that he scored higher than 79% of his same age peers. Combined, that comes out to a combined score of 100, which means that overall he scored better than 58% of his peers. So, when we look at these scores, we would say that Leonard falls within the average range. However, whenever there is more than 20 points difference between the verbal and nonverbal scores, we consider that a severe discrepancy. So, based on Leonard's verbal score of a 92 and his nonverbal score of 112, there is in fact a severe discrepancy between that, meaning that his nonverbal reasoning skills and his spatial skills are much more developed than his verbal reasoning skills. So, Leonard was also administered the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement. This test measures, has several subtests. The school psychologist chose to give 3. She chose letter and word recognition, which measures a student's ability to read vocabulary. She chose reading comprehension, which measures one's ability to derive meaning from a passage and also make inferences to what they've read. And then she also chose the math concepts and applications. This measures one's ability to apply mathematical principles to real life situations. This can be measured via oral responses and includes areas like number concepts and operations and time and money and measurement. So, this test also is based on a standard score. So, the same thing as the test before, a score of 100 is considered average. So, in letter and word recognition, Leonard scored a score of 100, which is right at average. In reading comprehension, he scored a 95. And in math concepts, he scored a 109. So, based on this test, Leonard is considered average in all 3 areas. Leonard was also given the Adaptive Behavior Evaluation Scale. This is a subjective test in which there's a home version and a school version, and teachers and parents rate statements based on whether or not the child exhibits those traits. So there are 10 subscales and 3 domains. So when we look at the scores, we have the domains are given in a standard score. So again, 100 is average. And when we look at this, we see that on average, Leonard scored about a 70 in all 3 areas. So in the conceptual domain, the social domain, and the practical domain, he's right at about a 70 between the 2. And so for that, when we look at our bell curve here, we can see that a score of a 70 is considered significantly below average. And so then this test is also broken down into the subtests. And when we look at this, a subtest, a score of a 10 is considered average. And so anything between a 5 and a 7 is something that we definitely want to keep an eye on. It's slightly below average, but anything less than a 4 is considered significantly below average, and it's definitely something that we need to focus on. And so when we look at these subscores, you notice that in all of the areas, with the exception of the functional subtest and the leisure subtest, Leonard scored very low, like 1s and 2s. So those are all areas that he is considered significantly below average in. The functional domain, the home version, he was scored a 5. The school version, he was scored a 7, which is still considered on the low average range. And then for leisure, on the home version, he was scored a 6, and for the school version, he was scored a 5. So leisure measures the ability to appropriately use leisure time, and then the functional academics measures those academic skills that are related to life skills or functional use. So those definitely are his strengths, are those two categories. Leonard was also given the CARS 2, which is a rating scale based on observations. There are 15 categories, and so each category is given a rating based on observations between a 1 and a 4. So a 1 is considered normal for that child's age. 2 is considered mildly abnormal. 3 is considered moderately abnormal, and then 4 is considered severely abnormal. You could also have scores of a 1.5, 2.5, things like that. So when we look at this, we notice in all the areas, with the exception of 2, Leonard scored a 1, and that would indicate that in those areas he is normal when compared to his peers. However, there are 2 categories that he scored a 2 or a 3. So in emotional responses, Leonard scored a score of 2, which indicates a mild abnormality. This was based on the observation that when Leonard becomes upset, he becomes extremely agitated. This can be as a result because he's been asked to do something he doesn't want to do, or he's been asked to do something differently than the way he wants. During these times, he typically becomes very aggressive, and so that resulted in the score of a 2. In the category of body use, Leonard scored a 3, which is moderately abnormal. This is as a result based on observations. When Leonard becomes excited, he tends to display body posturing. So he clenches his fist, he draws them upward toward his shoulders like this, and shakes his arms back and forth. This only happens whenever he becomes excited and is not as a result of aggression. Leonard was also given the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. This is also commonly called the ADOS. This is an assessment of communication, social interaction, and play. And this measures how well do students respond when they're asked questions. Can you sit down and play with them? Will they share? Things like that. And then the results are recorded just based on those observations. So based on this, Leonard did not just demonstrate any stereotypical behavior that was significant, as in like unusual sensory behaviors or repetitive behaviors that would be consistent with a child with the diagnosis of autism. And so because of this, there was a non-spectrum classification assigned for this test. Leonard received his autism diagnosis in Little Rock. And so based on this, Leonard's greatest struggles are his behavior. He struggles with managing his behavior whenever he becomes overwhelmed and whenever he becomes frustrated or overstimulated. His parents report that he is often easily overstimulated. Leonard was also given the Attention Deficit Disorder Evaluation Scale. This evaluation scale was a home version, so this is a subjective test. Again, it's a rating scale. Things that were noted based on his parents' results that happen several times per day is that he's easily distracted by things happening at home, like the TV, the radio, other sights and sounds. He fails to maintain attention to important sounds, such as instructions, other conversations. He has a very short attention span. He does not follow directions from parents or other authority figures. And then he grabs things away from others. So when we look at the inattentive aspect of this test, Leonard earned a standard score of a 4, which is significantly below average. And then on the hyperactive, impulsive category, he earned a scaled score of 5. And so those are definitely below average. And we know based on observations in the classroom that this definitely does describe Leonard. Based on this report, the psychological examiner did not support the diagnosis of autism, but did suggest that we recommend behavior therapy. So, like, he needs a behavior plan, he needs a behavior intervention, and then based on this report, the parents then went back to Little Rock, and that is where the diagnosis of autism came from.